But if you want to preserve your power indefinitely, you have to get the consent of the rule, and this they will do.
Everything out of the ordinary is to be reported.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
That's an interesting picture. It was a church. Do you know that word? Yes, there were still churches when I was a child.
You know, there was a time in human history when God and the hand of science were the same.
MK Ultra mind control rules in Hollywood. If you don't know, Google that and look into it.
Some of the names of criminals is hardly informing.
Criminals in a salad? Patriots!
Patriots!
Like patriots!
You're listening to Beyond Extraordinary with Natalina.
Greetings and welcome, all you lovely listeners out there, to the wonderful world of Beyond Extraordinary. I'm Natalina, and I'll be your BFF for the evening. I am so excited that you decided to join me tonight. You are too kind, and you look wonderful. I wanted to tell you really quickly that I am just so moved by the outpouring of emails and messages and just love that I've received from all of you, knowing that I was sick and that I was going through a couple of things. I detailed a little bit in the last episode, and oh gosh, it just meant a lot to me how many of you reached out. I didn't get a chance to respond to everyone's email because I have been sort of sidetracked, and now I'm playing a lot of catch up. So if you emailed me or messaged me and I did not get back to you, it wasn't for lack of caring. I'm so moved, and I guarantee you I did read it. And thank you so very, very much. We have a great show for you tonight, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But I just wanted to say really quickly that extraordinaryintelligence.com is the website to go to for the entire archives of the Beyond Extraordinary podcast. The show has exceeded my expectations as far as how many listeners we've had out there for each episode, and it keeps growing. So thank you so much, and please spread the word to your friends if they like podcasts. And you can always listen via iTunes, which is accessible via a link in the right-hand sidebar of extraordinaryintelligence.com. I am not an iTunes aficionado. I don't use it, so I'm not entirely sure how it works. So if you have questions about iTunes, I'm probably not your go-to gal. I would say talk to your buddy. If you have a buddy, he or she probably knows more about iTunes than I do. But I do know that you can access the Beyond Extraordinary feed to iTunes via the link on the site. And in fact, I think I have a couple of links because I want to make sure that you can find it. While you're on iTunes, please leave a rating or a review. I've gotten a handful of reviews that have been so kind and so touching, and so far only 5-star reviews. So it's pretty humbling, but I need more. So if you do listen via iTunes, why don't you go over there and take a second and just give me a shout out? That would mean a lot. Otherwise, please make sure that you share the link to this show or to anything else on Extraordinary Intelligence that catches your fancy. Make sure you share the link on Facebook, on Twitter, however you engage with the world via the internet. Sharing links, as always, is the number one thing you can do aside from giving a moment or two to us in your prayers. That means a lot. If you would like to support Beyond Extraordinary, there is a donate link in the right sidebar of the site that helps to keep my server running and my tummy full. Also, you will not believe it, but I finally made some new jewelry. Those of you who have been anxiously waiting for some new inventory to come out, I finally got done making some, and within the next 24 hours, all of that should be posted for you to peruse. let me see. Well, let's talk about the show. So my guest tonight was, or I actually interviewed him last night, but is Bob Cranmer. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because he has made a few appearances recently in the media. His name has been mentioned in People magazine. There was a show dedicated to his story on Discovery Channel. He was recently the full show guest on Coast to Coast AM. And Bob has quite a story to tell. Bob and his family, for quite a number of years, lived in a home, and they will tell you that the home was infested by a malevolent force. They would call this a demonic infestation. And from the reports, both from the Cranmer family and those who have engaged with the activity inside that home, I would say that demonic pretty much fits the bill. Bob Cranmer has a book coming out about this time in that home, and it is called The Demon of Brownsville Road. The book is due out this summer, late summer. And in the meantime, Bob has not been shy about sharing his story, and it means a lot that he agreed to be on Beyond Extraordinary to share with our audience about his story. He will be the first to tell you that while there are certainly some parts, a lot of parts of what he went through that are quite disturbing. In fact, if you are particularly sensitive, this is your fair warning. There are some disturbing aspects to what his family went through. But ultimately, Bob wants you to know that this is not a horror story, but one of faith, because it is his contention that it is his faith in Jesus Christ that got him through this terrible ordeal that he went through. A quick note for those of you who are particularly sensitive to the idea, I just want a full disclosure. Bob is Catholic, and he had the assistance of the Catholic Church and of priests throughout the deliverance process in his home. My personal feeling is that this is a story worth hearing and worth telling, and so I would ask that you just listen and keep your heart open, because at the end of the day, it is the Lord that Bob says delivered them from what was an awful period of time in that home. And I just wanted to associate it with a book that's going to be coming out as well in May, and that is by a good friend of the show, Chris Putnam. He's got a book coming out called The Supernatural Worldview, and I've been fortunate to read an early edition of this book. Chris interviewed me for the book, and so you'll hear a little bit of my story in there as well. But the book is about the supernatural worldview via a biblical lens. It's very scripturally solid, but it talks about much of what what you're going to be hearing from Bob as far as this evil presence in his home. And Chris's book talks about how the Christian worldview is nothing if not supernatural. And it's actually surprising how many Christians don't like to talk about these kinds of things. I find that to be to our detriment, because evil is real and it does manifest. And if we aren't willing to face that fact, then how are we going to help people who are going through situations like Bob Cranmer and his family if they cannot turn to fellow Christians for answers? Who are they going to go to? Psychic mediums, seances, whatever the case is. It's vital for us to recognize that these things do exist and that we can do something about it, because Jesus Christ is, he overcame this world, and his name is very, very powerful, and these spirits almost universally seem to recoil at his name, and there's a good reason for that, because in the end, every knee shall bow, right? Even those who are set to torment us and try us and put us through terrible ordeals like what the Cranmer family went through. Ultimately, it was Jesus Christ who delivered them from that, and that is the story you're going to hear coming up right now. I will put links in the show notes to Bob's book, to Chris's book, to Bob's website, his Facebook page, all of that. You're going to find all of the information that you need, and I'm really hoping that you find this show to be informative, and we will look forward to hearing your thoughts either on Facebook or on the comment section of the show notes for this particular episode. And actually, one last thing I did want to mention, this interview, there's some audio anomalies that take place. Bob is a politician, and you'll understand why he was so successful in that field, because he has such a commanding voice. And normally when I record interviews, I do Skype to Skype. That's the ideal way. But in this particular case, I Skyped to Bob's phone, and I didn't make any an adjustment. This is what I surmise. I didn't adjust his volume correctly, and so there are portions where when his voice gets a bit louder, there's a distortion, and so you're going to hear some crackling and poppling. We're going to stick with that. You're going to hear a crackle and a popple, or two, or several during his portion of speaking, and I tried to correct it as much as I could, but a lot of it is not fixable. But I hope it's not too terribly distracting, because the interview is really, really good. So you don't have to adjust your speakers or anything like that. The distortion is on my end, and I hope you will forgive me, and thank you very much. Enjoy the show.
As County Commissioner, Bob Cranmer ran a $700 million government entity with 7,000 employees. But strange as it may sound, he says his biggest challenge in life was trying to rid the devil from his Brentwood home.
This entire house was marked with a blood-type substance that would be on the walls and the ceiling.
I witnessed black shadows that slid along the floors and walls.
Bob would wake up every morning with scratches, and it looked like a cat's nails had scratched him down his back. Two of my kids saw a dark shadow standing over their beds.
In the shape of like a human, and it came just like hopping into my room, stood at the foot of my bed, and I just looked at it for a second. And I pulled the blankets up over my head, flew out of my hands to the bottom of my feet, forward, perfect.
But in the end, the power of the Lord prevailed.
The house at 3406 Brownsville Road had captivated Bob Cranmer long before he became its owner. In 1988, Bob and his family purchased his dream home in Brentwood, not knowing that their life would soon change forever. What happened in this home is a terrifying tale of demonic infestation and torment beyond what most of us could really fathom. It was a living nightmare that, in my opinion, makes other more famous incidents like the Amityville Horror appear almost benign in comparison. While we currently live in a society that seems obsessed with the paranormal, it sometimes can seem difficult to know what to believe. In Bob Cranmer's tale, there's a unique aspect in that he has no need to gain public attention or to seek 15 minutes of fame. Bob is a prominent businessman. He was a high-profile politician and has had his share of the spotlight. It's uncommon for folks with such public visibility to open themselves up to the kind of scrutiny that this tale surely has and will do, yet Bob has felt compelled to openly disclose the details of that difficult time. in his forthcoming book titled The Demon of Brownsville Road, A Pittsburgh Family's Battle with Evil in Their Home. And this is the story that Bob has graciously agreed to share with us tonight here on Beyond Extraordinary. So, Bob, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Just sitting here listening to your introduction and your comments, I was just thinking I like most former public officials have a Wikipedia page that details our political career and so on, and there's one section that has a whole number of op-ed pieces and editorials that I've authored over the years in the local Pittsburgh newspapers. Again, all having to do with either local or national politics, and it lists down, and then at the bottom is there's a line that says the demon of Brownsville Road. It certainly doesn't fit, or where there's here's a one editorial that says what would Lincoln do, or time to leave the Republican Party, and then the demon of Brownsville Road. So yeah, it doesn't really fit in with my persona. But then that's the way this happened. It's nothing that I was seeking or looking to be involved with in any way. It just it happened.
Right.
And that's the underlying point.
Right, and as I said, it's not common for someone with so much prominence and public visibility to discuss things like this. Before we get started in talking about what happened to you, just for the audience members who may not be familiar with who you are, let's just kind of go through the highlights and start telling us about yourself, because I think that's really important for this story.
Again, I have I think a fairly impressive, or my background is varied. I graduated from Duquesne University here in Pittsburgh, was commissioned a second lieutenant of military intelligence into the United States Army in 1978. Went on to serve about 9 years on active duty in the 101st Airborne Division, and several assignments in Washington, D.C., where I was a strategic intelligence officer. Finally, after my wife and I had several children, we decided it was time to leave the military because of the, just the vagabond lifestyle, so to speak, picking up and having to move every so many years. So our dream was to move back to Pittsburgh, and ultimately to move back to the town where I grew up. So I came back, or I left the military. I went to work for AT&T Corporation at the time. Got a great job with them. Came back here. Spent several years living here, and then got involved in local politics. And relatively quickly was thrust into the limelight on a county level. Ended up being chairman of the Republican Party, and went on to be chairman of the board of Allegheny County Commissioners, which 3 commissioners, $750 million budget, 7,700 employees, pretty big organization. And so that's my background. Spent 4 years as a politician, built a couple of major league stadiums, one for the Steelers, one for the Pirates, built a new convention center, and left politics basically because of those stadiums. They weren't real popular. Went back into the private world, and also spent a lot of time at home then, and that's basically when this whole thing at the house blew up in our face, in my face. So that's the thumbnail sketch.
Okay, well, and thank you for sharing all of that. Gosh, I know all about how those stadiums can be. I live in Minnesota, and you've probably heard about what's going on with the Vikings and the whether they're going to make a new dome over there, and all of the politicians there are trying to figure out what to do, what the right thing to do is, and
yeah, been there, done that. I know.
It's been a debacle. So I have read that you were aware of this home on Brownsville Road long before you ended up purchasing it. How did you come to know about the house?
Well, again, we moved back to the community where I grew up, which was, I wouldn't say by accident. There was this big, old, Victorian-era house, I would say, because the architecture is really more of a New England-style house with cedar shakes, and it's a brownstone with a real big front porch and white pillars. So it's not your typical Victorian house, but of that same era, built in 1909 and 1910. As far back as I can remember, and it's on the main road that goes through Brentwood, my hometown, Brownsville Road, which at one time was the main road into the city of Pittsburgh years ago. And for as long back as my memory goes, I was always fascinated with this house and would stand on the sidewalk and I was drawn to it. I was stared at it. I just loved to look at it. I wanted to know who the people were and what it looked like inside and so on. And so fast forward to 1988, we're looking to move back to Brentwood, and we are coming here to buy a house. And I had a job with AT&T. Initially was in New Jersey, and then we transferred back to Pittsburgh. So it was a great move, and so we come here to Brentwood, and my mother says to me, "Guess what house is going on the market for sale? Your house." And she already referred to it as my house. So there was little question then as to if we could arrive at a price or an acceptable price that we could afford, that in fact we would buy it. So that's how we came to purchase it. We went and looked at it. I was very surprised when I made the offer to the owners that they didn't even negotiate. They took my first offer. I was prepared to pay them, $20,000 more, but as soon as I gave them a price, they said sold. Which I realized that afterwards they were very anxious to get out of the house.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, that's awfully telling. So now you're living in the home. You've got a family. How many children did you have at the time?
Well, I do. I at the time we had a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and literally a newborn who was just born in mid-October, and we were moving in early December. So he was a little guy.
Okay. Now, after getting settled into the house, were things quiet at first, or did the activity start right away?
Well, that's a great question. Going back to the initial conversations with the previous owners after we agreed on a price and so on, I just had an odd feeling about the house. Now, again, a big place. If you've ever gone into one of these 14-room, 3-story houses with 10-foot ceilings and big open, big rooms that you could almost play basketball in, it gives you kind of a creepy feeling if you're used to growing up and living in a normal house. Mm-hmm. So I said to him, his name was Jim. I said, "Jim, is there anything wrong with this house?" Now, again, I had never had any experience with the paranormal or ghosts or anything, but I just felt led to ask that question. So when I did, he immediately said, No. In fact, we've had Mass in the living room several times. In fact, my two of my sons had their first communion in the living room." And I thought to myself, who has Mass in their living room? I thought, well, maybe it's some kind of an Irish tradition or something. And he gave that as his clean bill of health. Later on, years later, after we'd had Mass on every floor and probably half the rooms in the house, I came to understand what he meant. So, to answer your questions, probably within a few weeks of moving in, my wife and I began to notice unexplained things that would occur. You know, things being moved. The one example that I use that probably was the most prominent, it's in the video that was on the Discovery Channel. There's a walk-in closet underneath the big oak staircase that goes up to the second floor, and it goes up and then it cantilevers, goes back again. So there's a big area underneath this staircase, and there's a walk-in closet. In the closet is a light that looks somewhat like an old gas light. The house had gas lights when it was first built, but it was electrified and had a pull chain on it to turn it off and on. And that's where I kept my overcoat. And this was January. It was cold. I'm going to work in the morning. I get my coat. I leave. I come back at night. Little kids in the house. My new big house, and I go to hang the coat up in the closet. I reach in to the closet, which was a walk-in closet. So I reach in to pull the chain, and the chain was either never there. It would be wrapped around the top of the light, or it would be meticulously wrapped around one of the little screws that held in the globe, which faced down towards the floor. So after that happened 2 or 3 times, and I would have to feel in there and unwrap the chain, I obviously surmised that my wife was going into the closet where she kept the vacuum cleaner in that closet as well. She was pulling the chain and letting it fly, and it was doing what it did. And I said, please, when you pull the chain, just pull it gently. Don't let it fly. She said, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't been in that closet for a couple of days. So with that, the next morning, I said, okay, here's the chain, here's my coat. Don't open this door. That night I come home, open the door. She was with me. We looked. The chain's wrapped around the light. With that, we have 4 little kids. None of them, this light is a good 5 feet off the ground. I'm 6 feet tall, and it was even with my face. So they're not reaching in and doing it. So we knew at that point, there's something going on with this house. But at that point in time, it did not seem to be a threat, or it didn't seem to be malevolent, so to speak. It was a curiosity. And those types of events continued for a number of years after that, and we learned to live with them, and we'd come down in the morning and all the lights would be on, or the faucet would be running, or the radio would be turned on, different things like that. But again, nothing that seemed to be threatening.
Right. And so this goes on for some time, and I think that there's probably, if people are being honest, other people who have experienced things like this in their home, and I suppose the idea as well, it seems to be relatively harmless. Let's just see where it goes. And at what point for you, Bob, did you start to become convinced that you weren't dealing with a harmless presence, but something more sinister? When did it become clear that there was something more going on?
I would say it's kind of like a puzzle that put itself together. Just to go back again to that same early time period in the house, that spring, April of 1989, after we had moved in '88, I was in the front yard, up near the corner of the big yard, big lot, and I'm planting flowers. And my shovel, I'm on my knees, my shovel hits a little metal box. So I take the box out of the ground, I dig it up. It was maybe, inches under the ground, and it didn't look to be ancient or anything. It was like a Sucret's box or something like that. I open it up, and there are rosary beads in it, which I thought, I don't know what this is about. So I called the previous owner who told me about having Mass in the living room, and I said, Jim, what's with the rosary beads? He just said, please, don't ask any questions, put them back. Bury them right where you found them. And I did. So those little red flags in my head, they're there, didn't seem to be threatening or didn't seem to be an issue. I knew of the little things that were taking place in the house, but again, I thought, well, maybe this is some type of a, again, Irish tradition, blessing, burying holy objects in your front yard and so on, and I just discounted it. So, about the same time, my mother, who was Catholic, Roman Catholic, we were not Catholic, had suggested that I have a priest come from her church to bless the house. I thought that was a good idea. I said, okay, she arranged it. Priest came to the house. We were going through each, we were on the second floor, going to each bedroom. He would bless it with holy water, say some prayers, make the sign of the cross. It was kind of a joyous event as we're walking through as a family. My wife's carrying the baby. And we get to this one particular room in the front of the house, which we had given to my oldest boy, who was 3 years old. It's a little kid, little guy. And as we approach his room, he gets in the doorway of the door was closed. He stood in the doorway, formed himself in an X with his arms and his legs or his feet on the door jambs and said, "You can't come in here." He looks dead straight at the priest, 3-year-old boy, and said, "You can't come in this room."
Wow.
And I said, what is this all about? And so with that little guy's personality over the years, he became more and more introverted, more and more of a kid who just seemed to be plagued with depression, and slowly it manifested itself in him. Then it manifested itself in my wife and another one of my sons. As all that was happening, though, through those years, I just thought, okay, this is just, natural situation that we have to deal with, doctors and so on. But later on, when the whole thing blew up and the paranormal activity became in your face, so to speak, and the thing unmasked itself, then all that added up. And all the strange behavior and the fights and the discord that took place in the house with the kids and my wife and I, all of that added up and made sense. This sinister thing had been surreptitiously doing its work with us over the years, and then it finally exploded on the scene, and then it was no longer hiding its presence in the house.
Right, and I think an important thing to know on that issue is that for people to recognize that this isn't something that just sort of exploded into your life shortly after moving in, that this sort of was a slow escalation over, I mean, would it be fair to say over almost a couple of decades?
Well, not quite. We moved in, let's say, 1989. It really, I would say, began to become very serious about 12 years after we moved in. About 2001, 2002, 2003 is when it really hit the fan, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So it was doing its work for the whole decade of the 1990s, of which time, too, I was in politics. I was, akin to what would be the governor of a small state. So I was rarely home, anyway, during that time period. And so when I finally left politics and came home, that's when it really, I think, focused its efforts on me to get me out of the house and eventually to get us out of the house, as it did previous owners.
So, Bob, we know that eventually, and we'll talk about it more, but ultimately, with the help of priests and exorcists, this was taken on. But previous to that, you mentioned that you weren't Catholic at the time. Were you spiritual at all?
Oh, yes, very much so.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a teenager, I was actually brought. I mentioned my mother was Catholic. I was brought up Catholic. Went to a Catholic grade school. But when I was a teenager, I had a born again experience. and went on to become a evangelical Christian.
Mm-hmm.
We raised our children, and for years, we went to a local Baptist church and had our Bibles in hand every Sunday, and I taught Sunday school, so we were good Bible-toting Baptists and filled with the Spirit, and again, I mean, that's wonderful. I learned a lot and so on, but when the time came, when I needed help, and I just could tell what was happening in the house. There was something evil. I mean, you have things flying through the air, and all the activity that was surrounding my children and so on. Who do you go to? What do you do? I mean, I talked to the pastor of our church at the time, and he certainly didn't know what to do or how to handle it. And he kind of questioned my sanity. But when I finally ended up with priests of the Diocese of Pittsburgh, they were very businesslike. There was no questioning as to the validity of what I was presenting them with, and it was, okay, we have to go to work, roll up our sleeves. This is going to be a fight. And it was funny that it seemed one of them had kind of already knew about the problems with the house. So that began the process of I want to say cleansing, which eventually happened, but I would say that it got much worse before it began to get better. Much worse.
Well, and that's largely the reason I think that you telling this story is so important, because it breaks my heart to hear that you were a member of a church at one time that didn't really know what to do in the face of this. I think that's very common. And it's unfortunate, as I've mentioned many times on the show, what are Christians if not people who should fully embrace that we live in a supernatural world? And when confronted with the enemy or the darker side of things, it seems that there are so few people of faith who are willing to take it on. And that's one thing that I would say the Catholic Church really has an advantage, in the sense that there isn't this reluctance to acknowledge that there are sinister forces that do operate in our world and torment us. So that is a large reason why I think it is so great to hear your story, because my hope and my prayer is that people will hear this and understand that evil is real. It happens and people experience it.
Well, all throughout the New Testament, I mean, Jesus talks much more about evil and the devil than heaven.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, chapter after chapter, either Jesus or his apostles are dealing with demons consistently.
Certainly.
Either demons inhabiting people, demons inhabiting houses. It's a consistent thing. So whether we in this country, in our society, you go to other parts of the world, you go to New Guinea, you go to Africa, you go in the jungles of South America, the spirit world and demons and so on, it's a part of everyday life.
Right.
I just think that this country, our culture, our Western Christian society has been shielded from it for so long that, and for whatever reason now, I think it's rearing its head, and we have to be prepared for it. They said, well, you automatically went to you had this predisposition to go to the Catholic Church. I did not. When it initially started, if I could have called, Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and the Ghostbusters to come, I certainly would have. Or I told another, academic anthropologist of religion, he calls himself. I said, if I go on the Yellow Page and I get a shaman to come in and do a dance with his stick and his grass skirt in my living room, and it fixed the problem, great. But the only place I could go was to the Catholic Church.
Sure.
At least, we know the stories from the movies. You get old priests and the young priest, whether it's an exorcism of a person or in my case, in possession of a place, of a house, of a building, and I was desperate. Now, what I did find out, though, as I had my first discussion with the priest that the bishop had assigned, he said to me, "This is going to be a long process, and you have a decision to make." It was like in the Matrix, the red pill or the blue pill. You can take your family, you can try to sell this house, move away, be done with it, pass it off to somebody else, which obviously I couldn't do, or you can stay, and in a year we'll know if we're making progress. I didn't like to hear that, because I thought that they could come in once or twice or 3 times and say some Latin prayers and light some incense and do a few things, and it would solve the problem. Well, far from it. And at different points, we were really, including the priests, we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants. Mm-hmm. What we had to look for, and eventually found, was the thing was on a daily basis trying to attack us, to terrorize us, to keep us on the defensive. We had to find ways and what we could do, not only with the priests, but when the priests weren't there, what we could do to put a stick in its eye, to make existence for it in our house uncomfortable, as it saw us as intruders into its property.
Right.
And it became a war.
Right. And some people would use the terminology that, for whatever reason, something had happened perhaps in the past that made these entities feel that they had a legal right to be there.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Right. Do you happen to know any of the history of the house that might lead to understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. We found out afterwards, and again, without going into too much detail, because I did write a book that I think is pretty compelling, and with the help of another writer and a great editor, I think it's a pretty dramatic book to read, as far as if you like thrilling books. We did discover through a whole nother avenue, because we knew that different things had taken place in the house, especially back during the Depression. Apparently, the people who owned the house fell in hard times, as many people did. They needed money to pay their taxes and so on. And for some time, they let out one particular room in the house, the room that my son went to, and wouldn't let anyone in. They rented it out to a doctor who would perform illegal late-term abortions.
Oh my goodness!
And it was a house. It's a house that has a big portico and a wraparound driveway, so it was very discreet. People could come and go, drive around the back of the house, leave, go in the house, leave, and there would be no sign of any activity. So we found that out. But I think beyond that, we found some evidence that the house had, it just adds up, that there was a curse put on the house by one of the workers who built the house. We found evidence of that. But even prior to that, and this sounds melodramatic or just too much to believe. The land that the house is built on, back during the late 1700s, after the American Revolution, when the country was still new, there was actually a big Indian war that took place in western Pennsylvania and Ohio when George Washington was president. And for a number of months, the Indians were winning, and they pushed the Americans and the settlers all the way back to a Fort Pitt, which was Pittsburgh. That was kind of the frontier, of which our house is just a few miles from Fort Pitt. And the raids actually got that far, and we found out that there was a mother and her 3 daughters that were attacked and killed on the property, and are actually buried in the front yard. The husband and father came home husband, father came home, found his family killed, and buried them in the front yard of the house. And again, the book details how we found that out. It details how I confirmed it, and it's all pretty compelling. And so you have this long litany of kind of evil things taking place, all culminating, with the construction of this house and the curse and the doctor and so on, and then we come along and buy the house. But the priests also said that I was drawn to the house not just by mere curiosity, that there was some divine plan at work, and that the house being ready for us to purchase when we moved back was not by accident, and that the battle that took place there was kind of foreordained if we chose to take it on. And I think most importantly, we came out of that battle with wounds and scars, but we came out of it with a heck of a story that needs to be told, and that's what I'm doing. I'm telling it.
Absolutely. And yeah, it certainly seems that way. It certainly seems that it was definitely a reason for you to be drawn to that home initially. And I think it's safe to say that there was ample amount of bloodshed and evil that did take place in that. I mean, I can't think of anything more evil than having someone performing abortions inside the home. So it really paints quite a picture.
And again, I'm, I know that people are listening, and there's all this debate on the abortions, whether it's right, whether it's wrong. I didn't make this stuff up. If I was going to write a book about this, I wouldn't write that into it.
Yeah.
It's just too controversial, but it's still death. Whether you agree with it or not, whether it's right, whether it's wrong, it's woman's right. It's still death.
Yes.
And death, but see, the point is that I think the evil. I'm not saying that the American Indians were evil. I mean, certainly there was a tremendous amount of evil perpetrated by the whites against them, just as many massacres and so on. But I do think that the evil that possibly was with them, I think that, certainly evil exists, and the message of this book is that evil exists apart from people's evil intentions, and it will use those people to do extremely evil things.
Yeah.
When a guy takes a rifle and goes into a school and kills 30 children, I don't think he does that just out of mentally. He may be mentally deranged, but I think that's taken advantage of by evil. So you have children killed, and then you have children killed again, and then you have my own children who were attacked by this thing. It just focused on children and innocence, the innocence. And as we learned more about the demon itself, and we learned, and you try to find out names and who it is and what it is, we came across the name Moloch. And for those folks that, if you'd look in the Old Testament, there was a god of the Canaanites called Moloch, and they would sacrifice young children, baby boys, to Moloch. So it all kind of made sense. And again, I couldn't make this stuff up. It all came together like that.
Certainly. And I remember seeing about how you came to find this name Moloch to be associated with your home, and it had to do with that crawl space, right? That under your stairs?
Yes. And halfway into after the first year, and when things were really, really getting out of hand, the church wanted some outside observers to document, non-related to the church, not related to our family, that had some type of official kind of scientific credentials, and there was a young group of researchers at the time at Penn State University, and there was about 10 of them. They had gotten some publicity. The diocese had me contact them. They went on to fame as a television show years later called Paranormal State. But at the time we met them, again, they were a bunch of undergraduate and graduate students that just went out to investigate the paranormal. They were ghost hunters. So they came into our house with computers and light sensors and infrared, lights and all types of scientific type equipment to document what went in on the house. It went on in the house and wired up all 3 floors and speakers and recorders, and they got their fill of activity, and they soon found out that this wasn't your average, ghost haunted house. This was dangerous, and so to answer your question, I'm sorry I got off on a tangent.
No, that's
there.
Fine.
They had spoken with some type of a psychic before they came, a woman who was in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and some way they told her about the house, and however these people operate and what they see or how they see it, I don't know. But she said, I see the house. It's a bad house. I'd advise you not go to that house. She was originally supposed to come with them. She said, you know what? I'm not going to that house. She said she could see it, and it was a place she did not want to venture into. She said, it's just too bad. But when you get there, there is a vacant space in the center of the house that you have to expose, because that's where this thing lurks. It's like its lair. And it's in the center of the house, and it's like the evil heart of the house, and you must find it. So they come after talking to this psychic, and again, they're just researchers, and they saw fit to ask this woman. So I said, well, there is such a space. It's in the center of the house, exact center of the house, on the first floor, underneath the staircase. You actually go into that walk-in closet, and then this area under the staircase, which was completely closed off when the house was built. It's a large area. You can almost stand up in it. I'd say it's about 5 feet high inside, and that's the area. I took a saw, a hand saw, cut into the wall, through the closet, and accessed that space. And that's where we found all types of memorabilia, I would say, that was put there through the decades, taken from residents by this thing, and placed in this space. And I would say when we did that, all hell broke loose.
That's fascinating. So items that belonged to the people who had lived there, were there any items that belonged to your family in there?
There was one particular. This is odd, but we found some, and I actually at the time didn't go in it. A couple of the students that were there, the graduate student, and Ryan Buell, who was a undergraduate, they had, they were decked out like investigators, had lights on their foreheads and masks covering their face, because it was kind of dirty in there from the years of coal dust and so on that seeped in. It was above the furnace room, so I guess the dust had seeped in through the years. So they went in. They found some of my son's Lego toys in that space. Again, completely closed off. The only area, there probably, cracks the size of a piece of paper, possibly, in the floorboards, even if that, because it's tongue and groove wood, into the basement. So no way to get anything in there, and what we found in there, it was interesting. One, we found a large piece, about the size of a golf ball, of amber. Now, amber as I came to understand, has always been used as kind of mystically as a defense against spirits and evil spirits in Europe. Sailors that would go to sea would take pieces of amber with them usually made into a necklace. Small pieces. This was a large piece. And we found that amber in there. We found playing cards in there. We found this drawing that the original owner had hand drawn, a really nice drawing. The guy was an artist, of his family when they moved in, and they were in the backyard enjoying a sunset. On the reverse of that very nice picture that he had drawn and signed, not only signed it and printed his name, on the back of that were all these like evil representations of like there was a coiled up snake, there was a pig's head, and a whole number of other things that were obviously not drawn by him. So we think that, and what we came to surmise, that this curse was put on the house through that they were some type of mulatto, or I forget what they call it. It's an Italian word for the evil eye and so on. You put a curse on a house or a person that some way they took this drawing that he had made, put a curse on it, and put it under the steps as a perpetual curse on the house. And, I could go on and on, all the things that are in the book, but so many things added up. And I'm just glad that I kept such a copious diary through the whole thing, because most of all this is in the book and actually is laid out in a way that makes sense.
Certainly, and all of those details are important, too, because they paint a larger picture.
Yes.
So I remember hearing that another person who, you were on Coast to Coast AM recently, and there was another person who was on just prior to you, and let's see if I get his name right. Is it Adam Bly?
Adam Bly, yes.
Yes, and he was quite involved in your story as well.
Well, Adam came as he was a graduate student or a graduate advisor. I think he was a graduate student who was an advisor to the group of undergraduates that did this paranormal investigation. So he was a psychology doctor, I think a doctor of psychology, and he was with this group as well. Now, he was just a paranormal investigator at the time, and he came to the house with them, looking for ghosts. And he was so moved by what happened. Actually, they came twice. The second time he came, he was actually attacked by it. He was scratched across the forehead by this entity, and it bled. He had 3 scratch marks appear across his forehead, which bled. I've been scratched so many times by the thing. Never bled, but serious scratches it would leave on my back and my chest and so on, and on one of my sons as well. So Adam came as part of the team. Later on, though, I think as a result of what he learned in our case, and he came to the realization and the conclusion that this stuff really isn't to be played with. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be somebody's hobby. You can go out and look for ghosts and so on. You don't know what you're dealing with. I mean, you may think you're dealing with a disembodied spirit, that's some lost soul that's a ghost, and whatever that is or why it is. But you also have these very, very evil, malevolent, fallen angels that are dangerous, and they can hurt you. And they possess people and possess places. So that led him to really begin to research and to learn about all of the Catholic tradition of exorcism and infestation and oppression of people by spirits. And he's become quite an expert in the field.
He sure has. In fact, I think he largely credits his experience with your home, because he started out as you say, he was a secular type of researcher, and he with what he experienced in the presence of that evil, kind of put him on the path to where now he works directly with exorcists.
The church, yes.
Right.
Well, it was funny. Like, okay, so he's with this group that went on to kind of fame and fortune, and they got themselves a show on, not Discovery, on one of the cable channels.
Yeah, I think it was A&E. Yep.
Yeah, A&E, and I know Ryan. Ryan's an upstanding young man, and his folks, and he took that to the airwaves and really got a lot of attention, and I think caused a lot of there's a Paranormal Society of Pittsburgh, and there's probably a Paranormal Society of Minneapolis, and Paranormal Societies now in every city that grew up from that. Adam took a different route. Adam, who was initially in the pilot episode of that program, said, you know what, I don't want to do this. I don't want to direct people into this area because it's dangerous. And people can get hurt. So he went off on his own path. He didn't become part of their television show, not to begrudge or to criticize in any way what Ryan did. I mean, he was very successful. He brought a lot of attention to the paranormal. But on the other hand, Adam took another path, and
right.
He deals with it in a much different way now.
Absolutely, and it is, a matter of record that Ryan Buell, and anyone listening who is familiar with the show Paranormal State and who watches these types of shows, Ryan has said that your home is one of the scariest places on Earth.
He's a little dramatic, but at the time it was, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a comment from him. He's probably been to some pretty scary places. So, let's talk about going into.
Let me say, to his credit,
yes.
To Ryan's credit, and I thank him for this, because this was back in 2005, 2006, and I said, Ryan, I don't want any publicity. I don't want you talking about our case on your television program. If I write a book, I'm going to write a book, and I want the story to be told the way I want it to be told, and I think when it needs to be told. And to his credit, he would refer to this mysterious, serious case in his television shows, but never with any detail. And he held true to his promise. He's an honorable guy.
Well, that's pretty impressive, given probably a lot of people in the public eye, their propensity to want to give all of these details and share all of that. So that is very impressive. With all of the investigators that were in your home, and you say they have all this equipment and all of this, did they emerge with some compelling physical evidence that pictures, videos, stuff like that?
Well, I know they had sound recordings of things. They had some videos. They certainly had a video of Adam being scratched across his forehead, because they actually had it posted online for a while. Now, they didn't say where it was from, but I actually saw it on the Paranormal Research website. It showed Adam, and you could see the scratches come right across his head. So, yes, they experienced a whole number of things, and I think a whole number of things that were beyond recording. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the attributes that makes this stuff supernatural is that it's supernatural. It really can't be, people are always looking for empirical evidence, from a laboratory or something. Mm-hmm. There's one case where I took a picture of this thing. I was standing really not even in front of it, in the middle of it. It was right in front of me. I held the camera up. The reason I took the camera is because we had an old dog at the time, and I knew when this dog was looking at the thing. He could see this thing. He could see what I couldn't see. So I knew that he was looking at it. I held the camera up in front of my face, clicked the picture, and a couple days later, back in the day when you had to get things developed, we got the picture, and sure enough, there it was. Now, I couldn't see it with my eyes, but the camera picked it up. How does that happen? How does that work? it got me. But that's why sometimes this stuff can be recorded, sometimes it chooses to be, sometimes it doesn't. It would take different forms, completely different forms. My kids would see it in different lights. Sometimes it was a black fog. Sometimes it was a distorted human-like figure. Most of the time with me, it wouldn't appear in a bodily visible form, but it would appear to me as this unbelievable strong stench of smell that would occupy it was almost like a person who smelled. And if you moved several feet away from them, you couldn't smell it, but you get closer and you could. It didn't permeate the entire room or fill the entire room. Only when you were right next to it could you smell it. And it would move. I'd hit it with holy water, and it would dart across the room. I'd find it again, I'd smell it, I'd hit it again, but I knew when I was right in front of it. And we would have these nightly battles that went on for months, me and this thing. We had to take all the furniture out of several of the bedrooms upstairs because you couldn't sleep in the room. It would occupy these rooms, and it was a I don't want to say game. It was a test of wills. It was a test of wills. And again, it sounds crazy, but it was crazy.
Now, you mentioned that this thing seemed to focus a lot on your son. How did that progress through the years? Did it continue to torment your son, or did it move on to other targets?
It really, I think, just knowing from what he was like, and again, he was only 3. He was a little typical 3-year-old boy that liked to do somersaults and climb trees and so on. And when we moved into the house, and we moved him into that bedroom, that front bedroom where the abortionists would work. And that's the room he would not let the priest into. From that point forward, his personality began to change. He wouldn't sleep in the bed. He'd sleep in the closet on the floor with the light on, to the point we just quit trying to put him in his bed. My wife put a crib mattress on the floor, and that's where he slept on the floor for a good year or so. And his personality changed. He became very serious and continued to be like that. As he grew older. I would say in his early teenage years, he was a regular kid. He played football and rode bikes and so on. But then all of a sudden, he just kind of went off the deep end and became one of these ultra goth type individuals with the black coats and the black hair and the black fingernails, and his room was covered with all these kind of demented pictures of these people that sing that music. And I thought initially it was a phase he was going through, but I'll tell you, it was a dark influence that was you didn't even want to go into his room. He had the windows covered up with blankets. Sometimes he wouldn't even get out of bed for several days, and at the time, initially, we thought it was just a serious, medical condition, mental issues. But it went further than that. And then, in 2003, one evening, he was on all these antidepressants and so on, and he attacked me one evening in the house. My younger son got involved as well, and I was literally, this fight went on in the house. I wouldn't say fighting for my life, but he was telling me he was going to kill me. The police eventually came. I was arrested, and because I was such a well-known, notable person in the community, the media was all over it. That night, I guess when it was going on, because I was hauled off to jail, the county jail, my elderly aunt who lived with us died. My wife found her dead in the house that night. So it was a very tumultuous time. I thought again at first that it was just some wild, crazy adolescent rebellion went through counseling and so on, and the charges were dropped, and several months later, I came back into the house, something kind of against my better judgment, because I really didn't want to. And when I came back into the house after my banishment by the court for 3 months, that's when this thing unmasked itself. And the paranormal activity just went through the roof. And that's when I knew it kind of all then made sense, what was going on, that there was something in that house. And then eventually, I sought help. I went to the Catholic Church. I got help, and we entered into this 2-year struggle. Like someone asked me today, well, how did you know when it was over? I knew it was over when everything stopped.
Yeah.
And the whole feeling of the house changed. And my kids became normal again. And, everything ceased. But it was a long, long process getting there.
Now, I'm sure that a majority of what the battle tactics you used are outlined in your book. Can you share with us some of the things? I remember hearing you talk about how one of the weapons that you used, we'll call it a weapon, was, I thought this was so interesting, that the evil presence didn't like the movie Passion of the Christ. Am I remembering that right?
Yes. Well, anything to do with Jesus Christ, and for those that know that the Bible says that the name of Jesus Christ, every knee shall bow. So the person and the name and the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ and what he did and his victory over the devil is very powerful. So I thought that, and this is right during all the controversy that was surrounded that movie, and it was released then. And I saw that movie, and it is certainly graphic. And I thought, well, if it hates Jesus and it hates what he did, and it made the devil scream, we're going to use it. So we put it on in the room upstairs, which had been Bobby's room, my oldest son, and we put the DVD player on repeat, and that movie played constantly for over 6 months until the DVD player just plain wore out. But in the process, on a several times a week, the TV would be turned off, the DVD player would be turned off, the DVD would be taken out. It finally figured out how to take it out of the thing. It did not like that movie whatsoever. And that was a strong weapon, because that was something that we could push back, and it was continuous. It was a continuous thing that just played, and it did have an impact. And then the other weapons were, a lot of the traditional, what I called at the time, the Catholic hocus pocus, which I never fully understood until I had to use it. The holy water, the incense, the blessed candles, the rosary. The rosary was just tremendously powerful, and it hated rosaries. It would tear rosaries apart. It would mangle the crosses. I would say the rosary every night out loud. In the room where the Passion movie was playing, I would say it out loud. I would take the rosary to bed with me, and usually fall asleep saying the rosary. Every single morning, no matter what rosary I was using, I would wake up. That rosary bead the beads, for those familiar with rosary beads, they're little beads connected with tiny little chains, links that connect these series of 150 beads that are prayed individually. It would actually link those little links together in a form of little figure eights, maybe 4 little links together. Some way it would put that steel together. I had jeweler pliers that every morning I would have to meticulously pull those links apart, close them back, and open the rosaries back up again, because what it was doing in putting those links together, they could not be prayed. You couldn't pray the rosary. So that folks, if you're not religious or if you're Protestant, you can't get any more Catholic than the Rosary. But I will tell you that for whatever reason, this evil thing could not deal and hated the Rosary. Hated the Rosary being prayed. So agree or not, I'm just telling you, didn't like it. There's power there.
I think it's safe to say that from what you're telling us here that these things reacted in a visceral manner toward anything associated with Jesus Christ.
Yes, exactly.
And I've even seen pictures of crosses and crucifixes that were folded or broken inside your home.
Yes. Well, we all had to wear gold crosses, whether they were crucifixes, with Jesus on them, or just a gold cross, a metal cross. My son wore one of those, and it was funny. Not funny, but interesting. Mm-hmm. The chain was small enough that he could not take it off over his head. You actually had to unclasp it, take it off around his neck, because I didn't want it coming off him. This is my oldest son. We would consistently find the thing. He'd wake up in the morning, it would be gone. It would be laying on the floor. It would be under the bed. One time we even found it between the mattress and the box springs. That cross eventually, there's a picture of it in the book, it was folded completely in half, just bent completely upon itself. The picture shows it broken because when I pulled it back apart again to make it straight, the metal broke. So there's another crucifix that was on a particular rosary that I prayed. It was my mother's rosary. It had a silver cross on it. That cross was, if you could think of taking like a toothpick, like take the crucifix and put it in your mouth and chew on it, and chew the whole end of it up, that's what it looked like. It's just completely bizarre, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
And it didn't like crucifixes. It didn't like rosaries. There's been times when different medals that I was wearing would be mysteriously gone from the chain. I wore a little actual crucifix with the body of Jesus on it. It never bent it completely in half, but it took it and probably bent it halfway.
Wow.
But it did bend it. It bent it. It never bent it all the way. Whether it was because the body of Jesus was represented on it or not, I don't know. But the cross itself was bent, but it was never bent completely like the other cross was. But yes, it just didn't like crucifixes and crosses.
My word. Now, from the time, as you say, you ultimately were victorious over this, from the time that the battle really waged to what we would say freedom from it, how much time passed?
Okay, it started, I would say in December of 2003 is when I came back to the house. That's when the paranormal activity started. Let's see, a year from then, in January of 2005, is when paranormal, the folks from Penn State came. Another year passed. Let's see. 2004, 2005, about 2 years. And again, it's hard to keep track of.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, there was a whole year from 2003 to 2004. Then January of 2005 into 2006, and finally, I would say, I'm losing track of my time here. February of 2006, I would say, was the end. So from late 2003, all 2004, all 2005, and probably the end came in early 2006.
Well, praise the Lord for that. Now, certainly, let me ask you this. This is a little bit off topic, but in your experience with sharing your family's story, you've been exposed to other stories that maybe haven't received as much attention. We've got this recent story from Indiana of a family that was tormented so horribly, and witnesses report seeing a child walking backwards up a wall and other terrifying events. I would just really be interested in knowing, in your opinion, is this type of thing on the rise in our world, or is this type of thing has it always been happening? Do you think this is something that is becoming more prevalent?
I think it's on the rise more in the Western world. Mm-hmm. I think, as I said, we were shielded from a lot of this for centuries. And I do think, with the whole world is just breaking out in evil and war. I mean, from North Korea to all through the Middle East and Afghanistan and Pakistan, and all the way over to Libya and Syria and all the wars now in Russia. The world seems to just kind of be coming apart at the seams. And a lot of it is really evil stuff that's taking place. And at the same time, religion itself and the belief system has really fallen by the wayside in the culture of today and what it's become. I think that a lot of hedges maybe that used to be built around us, and we were protected somewhat from evil, I think those are being dropped, and we're experiencing now a lot of things that possibly we were protected, or not we, but there was protection from in the past.
Mm-hmm.
That's my feeling.
Yeah, that makes sense. It does seem, from my own perspective in dealing with this type of thing for many years, before becoming a Christian and after, I certainly can agree that it seems that there is a rise in the experiencing of supernatural events, and then conversely, and I would say unfortunately, a diminishing in the church at large in knowing what to do about it or how to handle it, which is really sad, because if we're going to be seeing an increase of these types of manifestations, certainly if people can't turn to the church, where are they going to go?
Well, I think there was, for so many years, and people just didn't believe in it. The devil wasn't really real. The devil was a concept. It wasn't a person. And, if you've heard, I know we have this in the book, the greatest lie the devil has perpetrated is the fact that he doesn't exist.
That's
he
right.
or whatever, not he, but it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of this was much more prevalent in the early days of the church. I think as Christianity spread and became intertwined with our culture, and I think it was suppressed to an extent. You read about it in the Bible, in the New Testament, and so on. But I think people just didn't have to deal with it that much. But now it's becoming more and more commonplace. And I think many churches that just don't have the experience. Now, the Catholic Church, which I think a lot of this has just been, I don't want to say forgotten, but ignored for so many hundreds of years. I think now the church is dusting off their old books. I know that every Catholic diocese in the country has been told that they should have a trained exorcist on staff, priests trained to be an exorcist. So I know at least the Catholic Church is looking to, as I said, dust off its old books and start to realize that this enemy does in fact exist.
Certainly, even right down to this exorcist school in Rome teaching priests how to handle it. There's at least an acknowledgement that these types of things happen. Bob, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I do want to ask you, you've told your story in a lot of high-profile venues now. You are on Coast to Coast. Your story was featured on the Discovery Channel, and now with the book that's going to be coming out, even more people are going to learn about what happened to your family. And it makes me wonder, has there been, since this, any retaliation from these evil entities since you've been exposing them on such a large scale? Have they resurfaced?
Good question. Well, just going back to the movie The Passion of the Christ, I was just at lunch. I can't have it. I'm professional. I work in government. I can't sit down to a meeting with people or lunch and what they want to talk about. They want to talk about the book.
Yeah.
And we came upon the subject of The Passion of the Christ today, and look what happened to Mel Gibson. I don't think he was prepared for the backlash. Mel Gibson was probably arguably one of the most popular people in the whole world at one point after his string of movie successes and so on. Everyone loved the guy, and now he's kind of viewed as a complete pariah, and I pray for him, and I'm sorry for what happened, but certainly I take this serious. I take what I'm doing serious, and I hope to, I'm sitting here with the rosaries right in front of me. I hope to prepare myself for whatever may happen, but I will say that if I put myself out here for Jesus Christ, and I put myself out to tell the story that we experienced, I believe that even though evil may surround us to hurt us, at the same time, only 1/3 of the angels fell. So that means there's 2/3 of them that are still on our side.
Right.
So I have trust in the Lord, just as I did when this was happening. But I would say that writing this book was no easy process. I could write a book about trying to write this book and all the obstacles that I had to overcome in doing it, and to get it published was really was tough.
Yeah.
It was. We have a major publisher, and I think it's being done the right way. It's a good story, and I think that's why it's getting the attention that it has gotten. It's not even published yet.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The book doesn't come out until August.
That's what's scheduled for. Now, if in fact they move that, they've really been after me to get. I had to close up some loose ends and get some signatures on release forms and so on from individuals in the book, and we got to get this done because we got to get it into production. So I know at one point in time on Amazon for pre-orders, it broke the top 1,000 list on their little book counter, which I think is pretty significant for a book that you can't even buy yet.
Yes.
Technically, yeah.
I think it speaks to the fact that there is something moving in people, that they want to know that maybe they're not alone in experiences like this, or they want to try to understand experiences like this. So just in closing, if you could just share with us what ultimately, and you've touched on this, but what ultimately is the reason for writing this book and sort of putting your name out there on the line with your story?
Well, great question. And just step back and put yourself in my place for a second, or for a minute. I experience, I go through this whole, not I, but my family, we go through this big ordeal. Okay, and we ultimately work through it, come out the other end. As I said, it's like being, in the Matrix. Okay, so we win. I have a record of it. I can stand here and tell you, this is all true. What happened, what we experienced, the good, the evil, the supernatural, the paranormal experiences, all is true. So, and from my own religious standpoint, and the power in the name of Jesus Christ that ultimately prevailed, So I come through this war, and I can write. I'm articulate. I think I'm able to tell the story in a credible manner. We only live so long. We only have a short time in life, and you work, you live, you do your thing. But what do we leave? What do we do that's really larger than us? And I think I have an unbelievable opportunity to impact a lot of people in a profound way, to take a real close examination of themselves, because God exists, the devil exists, and the whole thing is as true as we were told as children. And like it or not, there is a God that everyone will have to answer to someday. And I tell this story because, the Bible says, to whom much has been given, much will be expected. So I think I experienced this for a reason, and I'm expected to tell the story.
Amen. And we do appreciate it. If people want to pre-order the book, it is available on Amazon.com.
And Barnes & Noble, too.
And Barnes & Noble, and I'm sure it'll be available even wider after the release. And then you have a website, correct?
We have a website that we put together called The Demon of Brownsville Road that has, a link to the Discovery Channel video and a couple things. We just put it together initially as an information piece. I had no idea thousands of people would be looking at it. And then my son said, "Well, we need a Facebook page." Well, right. I wasn't on Facebook. I don't know anything about it, but he certainly was. And my two sons went to work, and they put together this Facebook page, which is linked to the website. Everything is linked, and every interview I've done is on it, as this interview will be on tomorrow as well. So, it's out there. Yeah. It's certainly out there for people to see.
Yeah, and I would recommend that the audience go check out the website because, as Bob said, there's the video of the episode that the Discovery Channel did about this experience. There's also excerpt from the forthcoming book on the website, and on that site you can link directly to the Facebook page where they do a really good job of updating on the latest that's coming out about the book. And I have to say that for anyone who might be wondering how Bob's family is doing in the wake of all of this, it certainly seems that this is a family affair. I've just in contacting Bob, I've made contact with his son, and another one of your family members handles the scheduling through email, and so it sounds like you've come through all of this as a very tight-knit family.
Yes, exactly. That's a good way to put it. And they were just as anxious. There was some trepidation to begin with, but they know it all happened as well. I mean, they lived it, and I said, "We're going to tell the story, guys," so they're part of it.
Wonderful. Well, Bob, thank you so much for agreeing to be on Beyond Extraordinary. I think your story is going to really move and help a lot of people, so we've been very blessed to have you on the show.
Praise the Lord. Thank you very much. Remember, it's a story of faith.
That's so awesome. Thank you, Bob. Good night.
Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Beyond Extraordinary with Natalina. For the latest headlines and program schedule, please visit extraordinaryintelligence.com.